Since late last week, we have been following with interest statements from the new chair of the Financial Services Committee in the House, Maxine Waters. According to Chairwoman Waters, that committee is really getting somewhere when it comes to its document requests to a major financial institution called Deutsche Bank. Her committee has expressed two areas of interest when it comes to Deutsche Bank. One is the bank's history of doing hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business with President Trump, even after all other major lenders had sworn him off. The second area of interest is Deutsche Bank's admitted involvement in massive amounts of Russian money laundering. 10 days after President Trump was sworn in January 2017, Deutsche Bank was hit with a $425 million fine for its role in a multi-billion-dollar Russian money laundering scheme that they ran out of several of the bank's offices. But it's interesting, that $425 million fine against Deutsche Bank was not levied against that bank by the U.S. Justice Department. That fine was actually extracted from Deutsche Bank by New York State, by a powerful agency in New York State called the Department of Financial Services. Department of Financial Services is essentially the regulator of the banking and finance and insurance industries in New York State. And although this Department of Financial Services is a state agency, and that means its jurisdiction only extends as far as New York State, that doesn't limit it too much, given that New York is the financial capital of both the country and the world. New York State's Department of Financial Services is an incredibly powerful agency with basically worldwide reach because of New York's role as a financial capital. Well, today, the New York Times was first to report that New York State agency, the Department of Financial Services, that same agency that got that $400 million plus fine against Deutsche Bank for their role in Russian money laundering, that same agency late yesterday served an expansive subpoena on Donald Trump's insurance broker. Quote, New York State regulators have issued an expansive subpoena to the Trump Organization's longtime insurance broker, the first step in an investigation of insurance policies and claims involving President Trump's family business. The subpoena was served late Monday on the company and one of the largest insurance brokerage firms in the world as part of an inquiry by the New York State Department of Financial Services. It came just days after Michael Cohen, President Trump's former fixture and lawyer, indicated in congressional testimony that the Trump Organization inflated the value of its assets to insurance companies. And Michael Cohen, remember, testified that they inflated assets to insurance companies. But you'll remember he also handed over financial documents that he said were given to insurance companies as part of the Trump Organization's efforts to reduce its premiums. Even before Michael Cohen testified last week to Congress, the Times had previously reported that Michael Cohen was speaking to SDNY prosecutors about insurance claims the Trump Organization had filed over the years. And we didn't really know what that line meant when the Times first reported that in late February. But last week in open session in Congress, Michael Cohen spelled it out. He told members of Congress, he told William Lacey Clay from Missouri, and he told Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York, that the president's business and the president inflated the president's assets in financial statements to insurance companies in order to lower his insurance premiums, which is illegal. And, you know, it sort of sounds like garden variety financial crime, but that's garden variety felony financial fraud. And now, according to these new reports, the insurance entity that would have handled the documents in any such alleged fraud is cooperating with this new investigation by this powerful New York State agency that oversees the finance industry in this state and essentially, by extension, around the world. And one of the reasons this is going to be fascinating to watch is because there is absolutely no way that President Trump can stop this one. The Department of Financial Services in New York State can't bring criminal prosecution itself, but they can bring civil proceedings, hello, $425 million fine against Deutsche Bank. And if they find evidence of criminal behavior, they can refer criminal matters to state prosecutors or to DAs. And if you are being prosecuted for this kind of financial crime by those kinds of prosecutors, it does not matter if you are president of the United States, at least when it comes to pardoning your way out of that kind of a problem, because presidential pardons only apply to federal crimes and federal prosecutions. So this one, This one's untouchable.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.